Hi everybody and welcome to SA Rugby Magazine. I have Mark Keohane, probably the most knowledgeable person in the country on rugby. Mark, welcome.
Thanks, kind words, thank you.
Well, yeah, I'm feeling kind today. Mark, a lot of stuff being written. First we're going to the championship, then we're not going to the championship. Then we're going to play in the Eight Nations. Now we're not playing in the Eight Nations. Can we say anything with certainty with all the reports that are on SA Rugby website there?
I think the one thing with certainty that we can say is that we're going to play in a domestic competition that will start on the first week of October and run till the 16th of January. So we'll have summer rugby this year. Everything is dependent on whether New Zealand is going to allow anyone in terms of the Rugby Championship. They've unofficially given the green light to it. The players they'll play that Rugby Championship in a bio bubble kind of thing, if things stay the same as they are in New Zealand at the moment.
How many cases do they have in New Zealand? 5?
I think it doubled to about 6 yesterday or something like that.
Okay.
So yeah, and I think they've had in all the time I think 24 deaths or something like that. So they have taken extreme measures. We saw that in the last week of their Super Rugby tournament when they basically shut down Auckland and kind of put the rest of the country on a level 2 alert. But yeah, my understanding is that the Eight Nations thing has been explored for South Africa if there was not going to be any certainty or finality on the Rugby Championship. Australia can still play New Zealand in the Blizzards, so they still get games. What was South Africa going to get?
But what certainty is there now when you use the word unofficially and stuff like that? I mean, it's a liquid target, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and I think they had to give an answer at some stage to the Northern Hemisphere to say they are available to play in that tournament or they're not. But I know they are legally bound to go to the Rugby Championships first. You know, I'd written a piece last week to say consider playing in both 2 Springbok teams. That doesn't seem to have been something that they spoke about. I thought it would
made sense.
It made sense, and you've got so many foreign-based players that could have played in that tournament, and they would have been playing against the likes of a Scotland and an Italy and a France. I would have backed, you know, a good South African side to kind of get through to that final. There would have been good revenue in that. But the Rugby Championship is where they seem to be leaning. I believe they've taken between 40 or 45 players over there because you can't fly someone out, fly someone in immediately if there's an injury. So they've got to take effectively a second team to be there on the you know, just in case someone does get injured or something happens. So that's 45 players taken out of our domestic competition as well. So it's, you know, we say the only certainty is the uncertainty, but we really are on the back foot going into that Rugby Championship. It doesn't matter which way you look at it. You look at the New Zealand setup at the moment. They had that North versus South game. It was a fantastic game of rugby. They've picked an All Black squad already that's in training for who knows what, but they've picked them already. So it would be a miracle for us to go there and actually do anything near competitive. Given the 5-month head start that New Zealand has had us on the moment. So yeah, and so you got to feel for the South African rugby players. You got to feel for Jacques Nienaber. This is his introduction to Test rugby as the head coach, and just had a brief kind of interaction with Rassie early in the week, where he's also, you know, it's not that they know anything for definite. They've just got to keep on planning for Plan A, planning for Plan B, and just try and get their domestic teams on the field. And everything's geared around the 3rd of October. Let's hope that does happen, and we actually see rugby in this country, whether it's with crowds there or not without crowds.
Well, you know, it's quite. I can understand the trepidation and the confusion because nobody has reacted with such stringent lockdown things as New Zealand has. So you know, the way they've reacted with 2 or 3 people that are known to have contracted the virus, it's a pretty tenuous rope to be hanging on to think that may not happen just before they're due to fly out. I mean, it doesn't give me much confidence as a fan that competition will go ahead, considering the way that New Zealand react to 2-3 cases.
Yeah, and if you also look at it, that you know they've closed their borders. They open their borders and they get a case, so they're going to close their borders again. So are they ever going to open up again? You know, so that's kind of. I said it at the time. I thought it was a huge overreaction. to the way they responded to it. And, you know, and I look at the rest of the world and the way they responded to it, they're also getting on with it and actually learning to live with the threat of this virus as they would anything else, and being responsible, being reasonable. And there has to be an integration back into crowds, integration back into a normal type of a sporting environment. You know, in the UK, and their numbers were astronomical when you compare it to New Zealand. They're talking about 20,000 being at Twickenham when that Eight Nations starts, integrating crowds back into the Premiership. So there just seems a lot more of a rational approach to these things. And I think New Zealand took a pounding when they thought, you know, everything was just sweet as they say over there, and 50,000 at a match, and they were the shining light to the world. And someone in a freezer plant contracted it, 4 people in one family, and New Zealand's lights went out again.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, assuming that we play, I mean, you've got to feel, like you said, we've got to feel sorry for Nienaber and the lads going over there. They'll be completely undercooked. Completely,
and it's
they'll be lucky to beat Australia.
Yeah, I think it's just like people forget that we've looked at the Australian competition, and for the early part of that, New Zealand were having crowds at their competition as well. So we were like, oh God, look at Australia, it's second rate compared to New Zealand. But I've watched some of those games, and there've been some very good games, and there's some very good players there. I think Dave Rennie can put together a very decent 23. But they've been playing, and they're match conditioned. And it's just going to be this hurry up and wait for our players. They've got to get in, and they've got to find form immediately. They've got to find condition immediately.
Look, and the Afrikaans boys, with all due respect, they're not the best travellers in the world.
No, and they traditionally they haven't been, you know, and it's very different going over to a World Cup like they did with an 18-month build-up, but to go there and know that you're there for the best part of 6 weeks, and you may not even get a game, because you're part of outside of that 30, where you could be at home playing, you know. So it's really the cruelest post-winning the World Cup to any coach that there could have been at the moment. And I think South African rugby public must also...
Jake would probably disagree
completely disagree while his Bulls are roaming around at home doing their thing in the domestic competition. But there's got to just be a sense of empathy and sympathy towards the Springboks, and an understanding that, my goodness, if they do anything over there, it's a bonus. And there can't be an expectation that they go in there as this world champions who are now going to knock over New Zealand twice and knock over Australia twice. And if they did that, well, then New Zealand can shut down for good, because those lights could go up for good, because that would be the miracle. You know? So I think just speaking to people again, South Africans are just so desperate to see rugby. They're so desperate to see their own players playing. I mean, the interest that's been in the French and the UK leagues has been massive, only because of the South African players who are playing there. And it's like Sale Sharks at the moment seem to represent South Africa. There's 8 of them in the side. They've come good in the last 3 weeks. Fafi's playing well. Andre Pollard played well for Montpellier at the start of their season.
And will those players be playing in the championship?
All in the championship, yeah. They've been released, and they will all be flown into South Africa for a pre-season camp.
So will they be isolated here for 2 weeks when they come?
They would have to, according to the regulations, they'd be isolated, and then they'll go into the Springbok camp. Alternatively, I think they may isolate them all together and take it from there. But yeah, it's going to be very different. And I think the bigger focus should be, from a South African perspective, is where do we play next year? And everything is pointing towards the north. No Super Rugby for... as we know it, South Africa going into an extended pro rugby tournament with the 4 Super Rugby franchises, and then your likes of your Kings and your Cheetahs forming a big part of your Currie Cup in terms of your domestic 8-strong team. And as someone said to me, but then where do the Cheetahs players go? I said, they go to the Sharks. That's where they've always gone. So it's a feeder system into the Sharks, and you know, and the reality is also, the Cheetahs have always been a fan's favourite and everyone else's second most loved team, but they can't command commercial presence in Bloemfontein. They don't get crowds. The investment into the game there is minimal. They're one of the biggest nurseries in schools with Grey College, with the university set up there, and then obviously with the Cheetahs. And we may have to accept that they are just a wonderful feeder ground into bigger things. And we were speaking about it yesterday. Maybe there has to be like in soccer, you know, you develop a player, you get a good lump sum back for when that player goes on and signs contracts, be it in South Africa or in Europe or in Japan. So I see the Currie Cup becoming stronger again. The 4 South African franchises going into the north and being very competitive there, which will also add to that whole essence of that tournament. It won't be the Kings taking 60 points. It'll be the Sharks playing against the likes of Munster and Ulster, and those games have gravitas then, you know, and to be a bit of an Irish Springbok element to it, where you were finding they were putting out whoever to come to South Africa and play in Port Elizabeth and hammer, the hapless Kings. So we keep on speaking about there has to be an investment in the Kings domestically, in the Cheetahs domestically, but I think we can only have 4 Super Rugby franchises. It's 120 players that can play professional rugby, not good enough to play professional rugby. And that gives you a strong base for the Springboks, aligned with your overseas-based players, where you've probably got 10 who are good enough to play Test rugby still, but a very good core of 30 or 40 who could be reintegrated back into the South African system because they'll be playing in the same competitions.